Welcome to the Animal Agenda. I'm Tom Kiesche, and this week I'm chatting with Aimee Sadler, the founder and CEO of Dogs Playing for Life, DPFL, a 501c3 nonprofit with a mission to enhance the quality of life of shelter dogs to increase life saving. According to the bio I received, Aimee has over 35 years of experience with multiple species in varying venues and has become an internationally recognized trainer and speaker specializing in shelter programs that enhance quality of life and reduce canine euthanasia. Hello, Aimee.
Hello. Thanks for having me.
So there is a lot there already, but before we go all Q&A, I have to do a few disclaimers. I'm speaking as an individual in my own individual capacity. I'm a volunteer with several organizations, and at least one of those organizations uses the services of DPFL. I've spoken with Aimee several times in the past. We've met, and I've also worked with some of her teammates. I did a workshop training with DPFL years ago and have followed many of the DPFL principles I've learned with playgroups I've run, assisted with, or even when I've entered in a yard to record video. Lastly, there may be some questions I know the answers to, but I'm going to guess that I'm going to learn just like you all who are listening are going to learn. So, Aimee, are you ready?
I'm ready. Bring it.
I know, you know, but maybe they don't know. What the heck? DPFL? Dogs Playing for Life? What does that mean and why that name?
Oh, that's a great question. Like, why that name? It is a little bit of a funny name. Truth be told, originally it was going to just be Playing for Life. But I think that was a baseball team charity group already had that one. So we threw the dogs in front of it. But the reason that our nonprofit is called Dogs Playing for Life is when I came into the sheltering field, I'd been working around it. I was a private dog trainer. I've been working with animals ever since I was 19 professionally, but I was doing some private dog training. And one of my clients, I showed up at her house one day. This is back in 1998. Showed up at her house and she said, "My dogs are good, thanks." And she loaded me up in the car and brought me down to her local shelter. And she said, "I will pay for your time. If you have any holes in your schedule, you want to come work the dogs here, just would love for you to help the dogs in the shelter." And at first I was I was really reluctant, not because I was already helping shelter dogs. I was working with rescues that had dogs that were struggling behaviorally. And so I would foster them. So I would help that way. But I did not want to go into the shelter environment because it was really upsetting to me. I mean, I'd cry every time I went into the shelter. I could not stand seeing the dogs living in kennels. And at this point, this was an older, dilapidated, looked like an intake pound facility. So the kennels were dark. They were facing each other. They were wet, cold, all that kind of stuff. But, I'm an all or nothing person. So once I went in and started puttering around with those dogs, what I couldn't stand was maybe having an hour or two and only working with a few of them. There were about 36 kennels at that place. So they had yards in the back, and I asked permission. Can I just let the dogs go out and let them get their yayas out and play together? Because then I felt that they would be better prepared for training. I think, Tom, I know you've dealt with it in your volunteer work. You go into the kennel with these dogs that are so frustrated or so afraid. Even if you try to offer treats, how many times are they not interested in that, right? That's not what they need or want in that moment. And so, I was trying to go in and do basic training, but I knew the dogs weren't even remotely prepared for that from a satiation perspective, to put it that way. So they thought I was a little bit nuts, but this is the good news. When you have a big donor behind you, basically. Then one of their biggest donors was the one that had said, "I'm going to send this girl down there." So that gave me a lot of doors open for me because of that. I had a lot of latitude. So the bottom line is I started letting the dogs, all of them, I would get them all out into playgroup, and then I would focus my training efforts on the ones that still seemed to be struggling and were still a little bit difficult to handle, so that they would present as more adoptable. And then I also felt good because at least I attended to all the 36 dogs and I didn't leave some just sitting in their kennels. So that is how this whole thing started. It was an efficiency issue and how I could target the ones that needed it the most while just letting them just be dogs together. What a normal, hey, they're a lot better at being dogs than we are at being dogs, right? So just let them have access and let them play together. I was always so comfortable with dogs in groups because that was my advertisement as a private trainer. The dogs would come to my home for board and train. And this is why my kids ended up being such great handlers, because they were crawling around on the ground and we had no less than 15 dogs in our home at a time. And I didn't have a kennel facility and they lived real life with us. So I always lived with that group of dogs in that kind of pack environment. So I was very comfortable with that concept, but it was very different going into a shelter environment and taking dogs that were very frustrated in adverse conditions and letting them play. I learned a lot about that, but that's why we are called Dogs Playing for Life, because it all started right there.
Excellent answer, obviously. I will say that you've just knocked out my first two questions, which is great. You've also made me write down 4 more new questions, which
Awesome.
is great. And I have probably 4 pages of questions prepped for you. So
Nice.
we have so much to talk about. So one of those questions was going to be animal shelter, Hampton Bays, 3 hours, 25 dogs. Tell me what it is. And that's basically what you were saying. That's in one of your bios. It talked about how you did not start to become a shelter group, play group guru, but it was out of necessity. And
it was that efficiency issue. Like, how can I attend to all the dogs at some level and then find the ones that need a little bit more, right? And that's why, sorry, go ahead, Tom.
No, yeah, I was just agreeing. It's that you're saying, which again, I was going to bring up later, but the every dog, every day theory. So do you want to just jump into that right away and we'll...
Sure. Yeah, that makes sense. That's what I think I came up with that tagline. I think that's maybe 3 or 4 years old, every dog, every day. And that's really what we're striving for. Like, we, in our work with shelters all around the country. So that start that I just shared with you, there's a lot in between that time in 1998 and then by the time that 2015 rolled around, where I decided, for all that time, by the way, from 1998 to 2015, I was working for this same woman that ultimately just donated me to shelters to start training and behavior programs. But in 2015, when I broke off on my own and created the nonprofit and started bouncing around to teach other shelters how to do play groups, it occurred to me, people were asking me to help them, like, how do I resolve my on-leash reactivity issues? How do I do this? And I was going to shelters that had quote unquote behavior departments. And I'm thinking, first of all, this is not a behavior department. You're not doing anything advanced or comprehensive. This is basically just a glorified enrichment program. And you know what? Every single shelter should have a meaningful out-of-kennel enrichment program for every dog in care, because how can we think it's so illogical to think that we're going to try to solve behavior issues through training and behavior work when you're not even meeting their basic needs. So every dog, every day means that before you try to tackle anything else, you've got to be doing that first, right? So there's no point in medication or advanced protocols when the dogs aren't even getting out of their kennels every day, right? It's illogical. So that's what every dog, every day stands for, is that every dog in our shelters in the United States deserves quality out of kennel enrichment every day. And when you're working with a high volume, typically play groups is probably the only way you're going to be able to accomplish that efficiently.
I agree. I've seen it. 2 people can work 20 dogs, whereas 1 person can only work 1 dog at a time.
Exactly.
So a little off topic, but I'm curious. You once had a job monitoring the training of animal actors for the Humane Association and training animals for TV and music video. Can you tell me anything in that helped you with what you're doing now, or some of our listeners may want to do that? So just a quick little bullet point, since that's a little interesting thing.
Sure. I mean, I think the easy, quick answer to that is that by working with multiple species, I learned to influence behavior through many different approaches. Some animals that you can't lay hands on, some that you can lay hands on, and some that you're sitting on, right? So there's all these different techniques and approaches, and being able to bring that all together, all of that history and that experience, and being able to come up with some pretty creative ways to help dogs that are struggling. It just gave me a much more broader view and option of how to help dogs. And I was able to help more dogs and less were falling through the cracks because I had this really broad amount of exposure. I mean, that was the best thing to me from working with multiple species.
I love that answer, because I tell people all the time, one of the things I love about volunteering with dogs is the amount of creativity and problem solving I do on a moment-to-moment basis.
Yeah, exactly. And I have to tell you, I tell my team all the time, I was 15 years in to being a professional animal trainer. Like, I'd been taking money for people, but it was at the 15-year mark, I'll never forget, I left a client's house and I thought, I think it's all coming together. And I think you could throw any problem at me and I would be able to come up with some kind of solution. But up until that point, I was still learning every single time I was out there with the dogs, or from every single trainer, I'd pick up something. Finally, at about that time, at about 15 years, I'm like, oh, I think I can come up with something on my own from all of this input that I've been having and that I've been practicing. So now things became more automatic. I always use the example of when I learned to ride horses and I was learning to post. For those of you that know what I'm talking about, where you bounce up and down while the horse is trotting, you're so off balance and you're so off kilter. And then all of a sudden one day you're just seamlessly and smoothly posting. And you're like, wow, how did that happen? That's what it felt like with animal training for me, but it took 15 years.
I have to be in the moment at every second when I work animals, so I know exactly what you're talking about. This is the Animal Agenda on KPFK. I'm Tom Kiesche, and we're chatting with Aimee Sadler, the founder and CEO of Dogs Playing for Life. So you've been asked a lot of these questions before, I'm certain. So I'm just going to cut to the chase, and I'll say a word or a quick phrase, and then you go. Make sense?
Yes, sir.
Improving quality of life by improving their experience.
Well, I mean, again, seems pretty logical. I think that it has to be a priority, and that's what our mission revolves around. So we do strive to increase life saving everywhere we go, 100%, but that's almost the byproduct or the side effect of focusing on improving their experience and their quality of life first. Because, listen, happier animals are going to be easier to maintain their health. So happier is healthier. Happier and healthier are more adoptable. So the priority is to make sure that in the name of sheltering and saving, that we are not torturing them in that process. They should not be suffering in our care, right? So we have to attend to their experience on a daily basis, I think, a lot better. And I think we were in a really good upswing in animal welfare for a while, but I think, right now everybody is so overcrowded. What we've determined is that it's not that there's an influx of animals coming in, it's that they're not leaving, right? So our outcomes have become stagnant. And so the shelters are just getting overcrowded again. And more shelters don't have the resources to hit that every dog, every day model. And, we see really good dogs decompensating in care, right? And this should not be happening in the United States, right? Our shelters should be that safe haven. And, there's big movements that started many, many years ago, like the no-kill movement and everything. And that was very important because shelters at that time were not a safe place for our companion animals to land. We thought we'd gotten ourselves out of that, and we have. I mean, there's a lot of animals are not being let go just because nobody came to pick them up at day 7, right? We're not at that place anymore. But I can tell you the conditions, and I'm speaking to dogs. I care about all the animals that are in our shelters, but it's not our expertise in our lane. So I stay very focused. I'm referring to dogs in care. And I think that we're in the next triage mode of having to solve for the very difficult circumstances that we put them in and expect them to not only survive, but we want them to be thriving in our care. And that is certainly not happening in a lot of the places that we're seeing. And the number one, you got to hit the every dog, every day model. And if you don't have that, that has to be the primary focus. Then you build from there.
I feel like I jumped ahead too soon, and some people listening may not even know what Dogs Playing for Life or play groups are. So in a short paragraph, can you catch those people up on what it is play groups are?
Well, playgroups, the context for us is providing playgroups within shelter environments. So the brick and mortar shelters, right? And that's having an opportunity for the dogs to get out and go and socialize with other dogs so that you can learn how they are with other dogs, because you cannot assess a dog's sociability with other dogs on leash or behind a barrier. It does not equate to their ability or inability to be social with other dogs. And so we know that to be true. And so the only way you're going to find out how they are with dogs is to give them access. And we have all these ways to do that safely when we're concerned they might not do well. So we want all dogs to have an opportunity to have contact with dogs, show us how they feel. Is this valuable to you to help you thrive while you're in the shelter? We learn a lot more about them. We can promote them. The ones that are social with other dogs, so much easier to get them placed, right? Especially in a city like Los Angeles, when people want to be out and about and in dog parks and at the coffee shop with their dogs, so much easier when they're social. So let's let them practice good socialization skills while they're in our care. So that's what playgroups mean for us in a shelter setting.
So to boil it down to those who are listening who still don't get it, basically within a confine of a fenced area. They introduce dogs in the shelter to other dogs and they play in the yard together. Hopefully that boils it down for everyone. If you're confused and still don't know, they've talked about it. They've shown it on shows like Shelter Me New Beginnings. You can see it there if you want to see what they do. And you can check out their website. What's your website?
Dogs Playing for Life, all spelled out. www.dogsplayingforlife, or .com.
So at any point, if you get confused, you can go to their website. You can look up their stuff. They have tons of video, right? The learning library, I believe you have videos on all sorts of stuff. So things that we don't hit on this interview, feel free to look that stuff up. So another word, and this is really vague on purpose, micromanage.
Oh, well, so our model of letting dogs play together really revolves around, I'm a naturalist, I guess I would say. So I think dogs they know how to be dogs, right? Even when we put them through tough stuff like a kennel environment. And so our role as playgroup handlers or leads in playgroup is to basically just be a hall monitor and stand back and allow the dogs. They should have their own conflict resolution skills. They should have good conversations with one another. We're not going to, just like watching kids on a playground, we're going to let them play the way they want to play. We're not going to micromanage how they interact with one another. We're going to let them communicate when this is too hard, too soft, too fast, too slow. And we're only going to step in when they are not responding proportionally to one another. One is playing at the expense of the other, or if they get into a fight, then of course we're not going to allow for that. But our whole premise is let the dogs interact naturally. Everybody wants to interrupt mounting, for example, right? For so many reasons, because we've been told that it's always revolves around dominance, or because people feel awkward when they see dogs mounting one another. What I think is hysterical is we'll watch a dog fully defecate. We don't think anything about that. Then people get so, insecure or weirded out if dogs are mounting each other. It's like, if they're having a good time, like, fine with us, as long as there's not going to be puppies coming from it, right? So we just don't want to micromanage the normal, natural interactions that dogs would be having with one another if we were not interfering.
So you mentioned the mounting. That is one thing that I have never really been comfortable with. Maybe it says something about myself, but I'm joking. I often see escalation that comes off of that more than anything else, honestly. The dogs overcorrect the dog that's mounting them, and it escalates quickly. So that's why I've always felt like that was one thing that I'm like, oh, really? We're going to let that keep going. But I do know that is a policy that DPFL and other play groups, they sort of let it go. So I'm glad you brought that up.
Well, can I share a little bit about that?
Yeah, please.
There's actually research around there. So Dr. Merkham, it was studied. They did this research in public dog parks, not in shelter play groups. But they were trying to look for the precursors to aggressive, like fights, right? Precursors to aggression. And mounting is not necessarily what the precursor to a dog fight is. It's people stepping in to interrupt the mounting. That is the biggest precursor, the biggest predictor that you're going to end up with an escalation after that. So that's worth considering. The other thing is that there are different reasons and motivations for the mounting, right? So what I've noticed, which is a really clear indicator, is if the dog that's being mounted tries to correct the other one, say, hey, get off, or I don't like that. If the dog that's mounting them is playful or maybe just sexually motivated, they'll kind of take that correction, turn their head, be like, they'll try again. My joke is maybe they'll say, how about if I buy you flowers, take you to dinner, whatever it might be. And you usually don't get an escalation in those situations unless the dog that's being mounted is trying to tell them, I don't want that. I don't want that. Maybe they're going to turn up their volume and say, seriously, no means no, right? You might see some of those. And those usually don't turn into anything. When a dog is mounting because their intention is to be threatening or assertive, those are the ones that you're talking about, where if the dog at the bottom is saying, hey, I want you to get off of me, then boom, they'll light up on that. So it's kind of what the intent is behind the mounting, which is really critical to start to understand.
Let's talk about corrections from dogs versus corrections from handlers.
Well, we want to let the dogs communicate as much as they possibly can. But when we see a dog trying and the other one's not listening, then we're going to get in and support the dog that was trying. And what's interesting is many people, maybe they'll hear a growl or something and they'll immediately want to correct the dog that's growling. Whereas a lot of times we can see, no, we're going to back up the dog that's growling because we'd rather them be growling or snarling or even snapping and asking for space than fully launching to try to grab the other dog. So we want to support all of that communication. Warnings means this is their way of saying, I don't want to have to be aggressive, so please listen to what I'm saying here, right? Those are the moments that we step in, and we step in when things must stop, right? I don't know if I answered that well enough for you, though.
You totally did.
Okay.
So in that answer, you talked about how dogs correct, some of the things they do, and how you support those corrections that the dogs do. You're listening to The Animal Agenda on KPFK. I'm Tom Kiesche, and we're chatting with Aimee Sadler, the founder and CEO of Dogs Playing for Life. The second part of that question I asked was how handlers correct. Can you go into that?
Sure. So very specifically, this is within the context of working playgroups in a shelter environment. We use tools and interrupters so that if we have a joke that we say it, then spray it, which means we have like a squirt bottle, just water in it. You don't have to put anything icky in it. You don't have to put lemon in it. You don't have to it's a nuisance to a lot of dogs are responding. It's a nuisance to them if you squirt them and you can ask them to concede space with it. We also use shake cans, like a little can or a plastic bottle with some pennies in it, little rattle can. And then we have what we call monster shake cans, which is like a milk jug. So it's kind of that soft and pliable plastic. And it's just a little bit bigger, and it kind of can act as a shield for your hand if you had to go in and interrupt, let's say, some dogs that were getting very barrier reactive and you want to get in there and rattle that can to try to disperse that. We also use an air blast, which is called pet corrector. It just blasts air. And then the big guns is an air horn, just like you would see on a boat or on a sports game that makes the big, like that's the big if you got to scatter a group of dogs. So we have these tools very specifically to make sure that people are keeping their body parts out of the middle of fights, because it's really critical that we protect the dogs from breaking skin on us, even if it's accidentally, right? Because then that means that they're going to go to quarantine, possibly worse, depending upon the conditions in the shelter. And so people get up, sometimes they're sensitive about the tools. Like they don't like seeing a can rattled at a dog or them being squirted. And we usually will squirt in front of them, touch their toes with it, move up. It's not like we just blast dogs in the face, right? It's all about intensity, volume. We say, can I just speak to you softly, or are you telling me that I need to raise my voice, so to speak, right? And when we say it, then spray it, we always proceed with our voice, because ultimately we're trying to use these tools to accentuate us, because ideally we have verbal control from a distance. So if I saw two dogs across the yard and they're getting too rowdy, or I need to tap them down a little bit, and I say, hey, easy, or if they know that predicts that a squirt bottle or a shake can is coming, one day I'm going to say, or easy, or get out, or something to that effect, and the dog will respond, and I don't need to use the tools anymore. So I've conditioned that, right? So we use these tools to keep animals and people safe in the context of shelter playgroups. We use much less of our bodies to get in the middle and direct them. We use our voice, the tools, and then our body is the last thing we use, so that we stay at a striking range.
Aimee, we are getting towards the end of this. And I'm going to say right now that I would like to continue this conversation in a second episode. Are you game for that?
Of course.
So let me follow up on that last thing you said. Some shelters I volunteer at, we have separation boards, big plastic boards that we can slide in between two dogs, or slide between ourselves and a dog that has lit up, as you say. Do you use those at all with Dogs Playing for Life? And why?
We have used them. That would be pretty much when it's throwing down is when we would get to that. Or if we recognize that a dog sometimes we have dogs that are coming out of the kennels. They're so happy to get out. They're happy with the dogs. And it is interesting, and I see it more and more, when they recognize that you're catching them to put them up or put them away, then we get a level of protest, because they're like, no way. I'm not going to let you put me back in that kennel. So maybe they're going to be lunging at us to like, no, I want you to stay away from me. I don't want you to catch me. There's times that we would use that to protect ourselves while we have to catch up a dog. But they're a little bit clunky. I mean, you are a stout guy and you've got some strength. I find those boards sometimes difficult to maneuver, and they're wonky. So it's more of a last resort tool for us.
Yeah. I take video of a play group. I'm not allowed to step in. To be in there to video, they don't allow me to step in, but they allow me to video. But one day there was an issue, and in order to not step in but solve the problem, I just took a board, slid it between the two issues, the handler and the dog, and everyone thanked me. I solved the problem without interacting. Does that make sense?
Yeah, no,
So
I think it's a viable strategy for sure. And there's times that we use it. We just don't have to go to it very often.
I gotcha. I totally understand what you're saying. So we are running out of time, but we are going to continue this conversation. Some of those things I want to talk about is just play styles, how to match dogs. People want to always know about how to break up dog fights. So come back next week, listen to Aimee answer those questions. I got to wrap it up because we're out of time. Thank you so much for being on the show.
That's been a pleasure. Thank you.
This is Tom Kiesche, and you've been listening to The Animal Agenda right here on KPFK, 90.7 FM in Los Angeles. We're streaming online every Wednesday at 2:30 p.m. Our guest this week has been Aimee Sadler, the founder and CEO of DPFL, Dogs Playing for Life. Special thanks to producer Marlena Bond. If you have any questions, suggestions, or want to know more, write comments at kpfk.org or the Animal Agenda's Facebook page. You can find out more about me through my link tree. And as you heard, you can learn more about DPFL on their own website, dogsplayingforlife.org. Please support listener-sponsored KPFK by donating online at kpfk.org or by calling 818-985-5735. That is 818-985-KPFK. See what they did there? Anyway, we truly appreciate it. Stay tuned for the Lawyers Guild with Jim Lafferty coming up next.